author of a book called Spangled Hockey, celebrating 75 years of USA hockey. And Kevin Allen, I believe, is joining us by telephone now. Kevin, is that you?
It is me. Finally, I have arrived.
Great,
well,
good to.
We're certainly glad to have you arrive. Did you happen to see that game on Versus the other night? I don't know whether you heard us talking about it or not.
I did. Which are we talking about? Tampa, Philadelphia? Or?
Yep.
Yes, Tampa,
Yeah.
Philadelphia.
Well, it's been the talk of the league. There's no question about it. And I think Peter Laviolette, who's an up-tempo coach, as we all know, made his point. That's not the way I like to play, and I'm going to make you come and get me. And they didn't. And tomorrow's the general manager meetings in Toronto, and I guarantee you that they'll spend some time talking about that. I mean, it's not like the trap hasn't been talked about before, but I think when you have that kind of situation in a nationally televised game, I think it's time to talk about it again.
Absolutely, and as Doug just said, I don't know whether you were on when we were chatting about it, but I mean, between the two delays and of course the two face-offs right in front of, just to the right of the Flyers net, it almost got up to 3.5 minutes. I mean, it was just unbelievable.
Well, there's no question, and it's not the sort of hockey that the league wants to see on nationally televised. I mean, what it really reminded me of, and it's showing my age, but going back to UCLA basketball when they used to dominate and there was no shot clock, and they teams would take the air out of the ball and slow it down and try to win a 12.
The four corners.
Yeah. So
Dean Smith was famous for the four corners. He loved that.
Absolutely. And the problem with this is, this isn't the first rodeo for some of these guys. They tried in the mid '90s when the Devils were very good at the trap to try to figure out a way to put a legal defense in the National Hockey League, but it's not like basketball where it's pretty clear how to do that. And they had all the great minds in the mid '90s trying to figure out, and they couldn't come up with it. I don't think they're going to come up with it now either.
But at least in the Devils' case, there was more of a chip and puck in the mid ice. They more so than even though it was a form of the 1-3-1, it was a little bit different as they took people on when they came across the red line.
Yeah, absolutely. And the great Scotty Bowman used to argue with me that he said the trap in his mind was an offensive system because it was designed to generate turnovers, and turnovers led to the transition game and scores. So he said, I don't know why reporters call it a defensive strategy. He viewed it as an offensive attack strategy.
Well, we were with him, Sam. We were with him the other night at the Flyers game, and he and Phil Esposito and Bobby Taylor and the four of us, along with Doug. And we spent a lot of time talking about it between periods 1 and 2, and nobody's seen more hockey than those guys, and they couldn't believe it.
Yeah. Scotty gets to a lot of games down in Tampa.
Oh yeah, he sees almost every game.
Yeah. He's still current. I still enjoy speaking to him. I mean, what made Scotty Bowman a remarkable coach was his ability to stay current. He was not the same coach he was in the 1970s, in the 1990s. He just adapted, and while everyone else was trying to do things the same way, he was constantly. I mean, he was the first coach I ever met who was totally up on the internet. I used to get emails from him, and they'd be stamped at 3:30 in the morning, so he was up all night, trying to get advantages. So he's one of the most remarkable men I've met in my lifetime. There's no question about it.
I think if you look over his career, and I've said this for many years now, not just because we happen to know him, but I don't think there's a more successful coach. You can talk about Lombardi's and you can talk about Shula's, but here's a guy that did it with so many different teams and over so long a period of time. I don't think there's ever been a coach
McClure, not Eiserman, not any of them. He goes, no. He never, he said he was never one to hand out praise. It's just not what he did. And I remember that every journalist who's been around covering the league, at least as long as I have, remembers that when the Penguins won the Cup and Scotty was behind the bench, after the last game when they won the championship, he said, I've coached a lot of players in my life, but Mario Lemieux, he started down the path, and you could actually hear all of the reporters click on their tape recorders that they knew they were about to get something good there because they'd never heard it. And then Scotty realized, of course, that he was about to hand out some praise, and then he said, but the power play tonight I thought was really good, and we never got that one little piece. And it was so typically Scotty, and I've never forgotten that moment.
He goes back to the first expansion, '67. I think he was the first coach of the St. Louis Blues, and they went to the finals, I believe, that first year. So then he went to, Montreal, won the 5 cups in a row. Was it Buffalo, Pittsburgh, Detroit, and now with the Blackhawks as a scout, and his son, I believe, the GM. So that legacy is unbelievable.
Not only that, but they made a resurgence as Blackhawks after last year, 2 years ago, winning the Cup, and then having a little fall off last year and not being able to retain their players. But it looks like they're coming back a little bit this year.
Well, as much as it gets a lot of attention, I think some people don't realize, but the Stanley Cup hangover is a real event, and I think it's my personal opinion. It's the mental difficulty of 3 months after that you won the Cup, you got to wind it up again. And I know Jim Rutherford, the Carolina Hurricanes general manager, describes it or compares it to climbing Mount Everest, and then you finally make the ascent, and then 3 months later you gather your team together and say, all right, let's do it again. And when you're at the bottom of that mountain looking up after you've just done it 3 months before, I think it's staggering, and I think mentally it's overwhelming, and I think that's what happens to team is and then of course on top of that, Chicago, as you mentioned, had all the changes. But I think it really is mentally daunting, and I think that's the difficulty.
Let's talk about your book, Kevin. It's called Star Spangled Hockey. Even though Scotty's a great hockey figure, he's not. At least wasn't born in America. I don't know if he's a citizen now, but your book focuses on the great American hockey players, not only NHL but Olympic as well, and going back to some of the early American hockey players that were in the NHL back in the 20s and 30s. How'd you put this project together?
Well, having covered the league for as long as I have, I've always been interested. As a writer for USA Today, we've had a concentration on, American hockey, and I've kept track of my interviews through the years, and I originally wrote my American hockey history book in 1996 after the Americans won the World Cup, and 15 years later, I thought it was time to update it. So much had happened, and really, the impetus for me is that I've started to see the players from what I call America's greatest hockey generation. I'm talking about the group that includes, Chris Chelios and Leach and Roenick and Mike Modano and Kachuk and Bill Guerin. I don't think there's any question that group is by far the best American, generation. And I wanted kind of a vehicle and a forum to write a little bit about that and kind of give my thoughts on, how good this is. And one of the comparisons I make is here we are now as an American hockey program where 1 in 5 players in the NHL is now an American. And that's remarkable when you consider that in 1969 the Americans sent more men to the moon. There were 6 astronauts that made lunar orbits than they sent to the National Hockey League. There were only 5 Americans in the league. So the fact that 1 in 5 now is remarkable. But when you say that, let's compare now the center ice of the top American players to that greatest hockey American generation that had Pat LaFontaine, Mike Modano, Jeremy Roenick, Dougie Weight, and I just like to throw in at number 5, Joe Lotto, because he was a great two-way center, and he was a guy you could match up against the big centers out in the West there. Well, let's look at today. It's like Ryan Kessler fits really nicely in that group. But then we've got Stastny, who's a very good player, but certainly doesn't compete with those guys, or Joe Pavelski, Scotty Gomez. I mean, we don't have the superstars. We have the depth with the American program. We don't have the superstars. So to me, that's not an indictment on today's players. I think it just shows how great the players were from America's hockey's greatest generation.
Well, it's interesting because they've been trying to do the same thing with soccer for such a long time, and they haven't been able to really, maybe closer to it now. I mean, you could go back for 40 years, and everybody said, well, you know, every school in America is playing soccer now, and it's only going to be a matter of time, and we're going to have the world's greatest soccer players. And it seems when they get to ninth grade, that's the end of the time that they play soccer. So, but at least in hockey, as you say, 1 and 5, so they certainly made great inroads.
Yeah, there's no question about that. And you know, when you look back too, and you know, certainly the Miracle on Ice played a major role.
Oh yeah.
You know, prior to that, there were some teams that were starting to look at American players, and ironically, the Montreal Canadiens were a team that was looking hard at American players in the 1970s, and you know, Minnesota North Stars, Lou Nanne was looking at players as well, and you know, the Washington Capitals, when they came into the league, started looking at American players. But all of it changed after the Miracle on Ice. I remember Mark Johnson told me that before the Olympic Games, he had a 3-way contract offer from the Pittsburgh Penguins. Now, I had never heard of a 3-way offer before, where they paid you one salary for the American League and one for the league below that, and then another if you'd made the NHL. But of course, after the '80 Miracle on Ice, most of those American players got one-way contracts, and most of them acquitted themselves quite well, as we all know. Guys like Dave Christian and Ramsey and Morrow, and I think because of that, you know, kind of paved the way for others to follow.
Yeah, and I also think that out in Minnesota and Wisconsin, in that particular area, as well as up in Boston, I mean, hockey really became, as far as the universities was concerned, it really started to build and build and build, and now, you know, they're really a force.
Yeah, there's no question. I mean, I remember being in college in the 1970s, and a geography professor that I knew named Carl Ojala, who had put together a club program at Eastern Michigan University, developed what he called the hockey belt, where he kind of looked at where hockey players came in Michigan. And you know, even before he did the project, I said, I can tell you where they're coming from. They're coming from Michigan and Massachusetts and Minnesota. Well, if you did that hockey belt today, you know, you'd swing up to New York, because there are now more players coming out of the state of New York in the National Hockey League than there are actually Russians in the NHL. And then we got to swing down in Ohio now, and we'll have a big concentration out in California, and they're not only populating the NHL now, but they're having an impact in the Western Hockey League as well. And you know, we're starting to get players out of non-traditional markets. A guy like Blake Jeffrey-Owen coming out of Tennessee, a 4th-generation NHLer. So, you know, the inroads that the America program has made has also directly resulted from expansion and the fact that we now have a lot more arenas in non-traditional areas.
No question.
Yeah, I remember one of the early New York players that was born in New York. I think Staten Island, if I'm not mistaken, maybe Brooklyn. I'm not sure. Remember Nick Fatiou played for the Rangers, I believe. Wasn't he from Staten Island?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
not a great player, but he was a favorite in New York.
No, but yeah, he was certainly a tough competitor. There's no doubt about that.
You talk in the book, The Miracle on Ice. Of course, everybody remembers that from 1980, but fewer people really talk about it. You have a whole chapter dedicated to it. I saw a special on ESPN. They did a whole documentary on the 1960 U.S. gold medal winning team, and they almost get short shrift, don't they, Kevin? I mean, nobody really thinks about them, but they were the first team to do it.
Yeah, there's no question about that. I mean, and that may have been just as big of a miracle, because, you know, Canada was at that Olympic Games. Harry Sinden played for the Canadian team. And
right.
I remember in '96 when I first interviewed him for, you know, I started my research on this. He barely could talk about it. I mean, even then it was 36 years later, and he was still angry that the Americans had upset them. And the Cleary brothers were on that team. Bill Cleary, of course, was the hockey coach. You know, that's where he sort of made his reputation. But he was a tremendous player, and probably could have played in the National Hockey League if they could have paid him enough, you know, after that 1960. But, you know, off of that team, Jack McCartan was the goalie, and you know, traditionally when the Americans have done well in international hockey, the goalie has been a star, and that was certainly the case in '60. He had a short career in the NHL, but really the only player that had an impact in the National Hockey League about that '60 team was Tommy Williams, who was a very fast, speedy player, and had a pretty decent career in the National Hockey League. He was kind of a flamboyant, dynamic player, but that '60 team, I agree with you. It has never probably received as much attention. That was outdoors, and the television had just started to come and cover the Olympics. Not like we know it today, but they had expanded coverage. But still, you didn't get much hockey, so didn't get much notoriety. But its accomplishment, nonetheless, was pretty historic in the American program.
One last question from me, and that would be after the lengthy strike, and of course, unfortunately, we down here in Florida are very familiar with what happened to the Lightning after they win the Cup. But how do you see the National Hockey League as it stands now, and can you contrast that at all to what we're seeing in the NBA, and are they going to have to do the same thing, maybe shut it down for a year to equalize where they are?
Well, to me, it's really scary. Like I was really, my glass was half full. I really thought that I was pretty confident we were going to get a new CBA. Donald Fear, of course, from baseball, is the new executive director, and I've spoken to him a few times, and I don't have any sense that he's got to get down in the trenches and battle this to the nth degree. But saying all that, when I see what's going on in the NBA and I see how far they're pushing the players, if the NHL does that, we could be a long, protracted lockout. And I would hate to see that because I think even though they recovered from the first time around and fans were quick to come back, I would worry that a second lost season so close could do detrimental damage to the game, particularly when they're making such great strides. Like you look at the NBC television package and now versus being transformed into the NBC Sports channel as well. And, I think there are more people now that understand hockey in this country or know about it than we've ever had, and starting to make inroads. So I hope that we don't have a protracted lockout. I hope that cooler heads will prevail, but I'm a little less optimistic based on what I see in the NBA than I was 6 months ago.
It is scary.
Yeah. Name of the book is called Spangled Hockey, celebrating 75 years of USA Hockey. We've been talking with Kevin Allen on the show. And Kevin, you have a website? People can get a hold of you or the book?
Well, really the best place is Amazon.com. They discount things right out of the gate, and it's quick delivery there. So that's where most people are getting it from. It is available in most bookstores if you can find a bookstore these days.
That's right.
That's the biggest problem. But it would make a nice Christmas gift, as I like to say, for the hockey fan.
Well, as a hockey.
The bookstores are going pretty quickly.
Yes, they are. Yeah.
Well, as a hockey fan, I enjoyed reading through it. You got some great pictures and great memories of a lot of the players I remember growing up, and it was really a pleasure to have you on with us today. I'm glad we finally were able to connect with you, and we'll do it again down the road. Thanks for being with us.
Call me anytime.
Great. Thanks, Kevin.
Guys.